Hello, good evening and welcome. Happy Christmas. Welcome to this special Christmas show where my lovely little Christmas angel, Jacqui Smith, and I are going to look back at 2020 through the lens of the people who made an impact on all of us this year. We're calling the show People of 2020 and we'll be joined by a host of guests throughout the next hour who will tell us who they think deserves the title of LBC Person of the Year. Well, joining us will be Impressionist Rory Bremner, the man who used to be Foreign Secretary and actually introduced Jacqui and me all those years ago to each other. David Miliband, he'll be playing Gooseberry a little later. We have former Conservative star Anne Widdecombe. Well, actually, she's a current Conservative star, isn't she? And the man who wants to be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Her Majesty's Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer. But first, let me introduce my Woman of the Year. It's my partner in crime from our For the Many podcast, and in case you didn't know, she used to be Home Secretary, Jacqui Smith. Hello.
Hello, Iain. What more could I have wanted as a Christmas present than to be back with you in the flesh today?
Indeed, but less of the flesh. Now, what's Christmas like in the Smith household normally?
It is full of family, sisters, mum. It's full of food. The odd drink is taken.
The odd drink, yeah. I know you. What did I call you on Good Morning Britain the other week? An old lush.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we play charades.
That's a fantastic game, isn't it? You
I
kind of have
love
to
it.
be in the mood for it, though.
I have a new friend who will be coming. Is coming.
A new friend? Of which particular sex would that be?
I have a new fella. And the only thing he said to me pre-Christmas was, we don't have to do anything like charades, do we? Well, the bad news is, yes.
Yeah, well, I look forward to hearing how that's gone. We're going to be looking at various people who we think could be described as Person of the Year in different categories. Let's start off, before we come to our first guest, let's start off by looking at people from around the world. And I've made a little list here. Jacinda Ardern, I think, is one, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. She's won a lot of plaudits for her reaction to COVID. She won a general election as well. Really impressive character.
Enormously impressive. I mean, let's not forget they only had 25 COVID deaths in New Zealand because of the action that she took to bring in a lockdown really quickly, to close the borders. Now, of course, it's a smaller country, but I think everybody around the world is saying that's the way that you needed to have responded to this COVID crisis. And amidst all of it, as you say, she campaigned and won a general election as well.
Now, I've also got, you'll be very surprised to hear this, two people from the EU. Ursula von der Leyen, who I think has the most fabulous hair, and Michel Barnier, who doesn't.
A successful year for both of them, perhaps we might we might say.
You might say.
No,
that.
Michel Barnier's got lovely hair. He's very suave. I as we've discussed on the podcast, when I was a minister, I met Michel Barnier, and he did have then a reputation for being quite steely in a suave French sort of a way, and he's continued that.
He didn't charm you, though, did he? You didn't like him.
I found him a bit of a cold fish, but then, we were in a negotiation, and as we've seen, he can be quite a tough negotiator.
Oh, I think he's done a fabulous job for the EU. And Ursula von der Leyen, she was Defence Minister in the German government under Angela Merkel, was seen as a rising star, but then she had a few difficulties and they've shunted her off to Brussels. What impact has she made this year?
I think, she's obviously brought a slightly new style to the way in which the EU operates. The big tasks remain ahead of her because essentially what she now needs to do is to enable the EU post-Brexit to do all of the things that it's been wanting to do and working on anyway. So we've tended to see her through the sort of prism of Brexit, but actually there is a massive lot of work that the EU wants to do, closer integration, interesting potentially stuff on defence, security, all the sorts of things that we might have put a stop to had we still been there.
Now, I suppose one of the moments of the year, some people might say the moment of the year, was the brutal murder of George Floyd. And I suspect if we, at the end of the hour, are compiling a sort of top 3-5 people of the year, his name will feature. It made a massive impact, didn't it?
Well, it resonated across the world, of course. It was a brutal murder. It identified the racism that remains within the US and arguably in other countries as well. It brought about, I think it probably had an influence on the US election. And actually, the development of a sort of Black Lives Matters campaign separate from individual organisations that might be involved, has resonated. There's not an organisation that I work in the UK that has not this year tried to readdress and up its commitment to ensuring fairness for people regardless of race. That is an impact.
It absolutely is. And I think my moment of the year in broadcasting was the moment that Denise Headley rang in, and since then she's become a regular part of my show. And had that not happen, had the George Floyd murder not happen, had the Black Lives movement not had such an impact, she wouldn't have got through the front door, I suspect. And I think all organisations, including this one, have made a real effort to up their game on this. When we decided to do this programme, I thought, who should I get on as guest? And I thought, well, we could kill 20 birds with one stone by getting Rory Bremner on. So here he is. Rory, very, very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us.
Very nice. Yes, so 20 for the price of one. Or I'm hoping 3. I'm hoping for the price, maybe for the price of 7.
Now,
we could do a deal.
Yeah, well, less of that one. We might come back to that in a moment. But before we get on to other issues, who would you like to nominate as your 3 people of 2020?
Oh, this is hard. There's several honorary mentions. I thought because of Jacqui, I should recommend the production team at Strictly, who they entertained us. Jacqui, I've got to say, the Home Secretary looks so at home on the dance floor, my darling. What a beautiful samba. But I'm not going to embarrass you. But that was just, we talk about the entertainment industry, and you go through the West End now and you see the theatre posters as stopped as they were in February. But they put on a fantastic show entertaining the nation. I have to say, you nearly got an all-female shortlist, because one thing this year has been the leadership shown by women around the world, whether we're talking about Jacinta Ardern in New Zealand or Sanna Marin in Finland, of course, and in Belarus, Maria Kolesnikova, that incredible feat of bravery where they were trying to get her out of the country and she ripped up her passport. Just the most incredible courage. And of course, the opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. Я люблю говорить по-русски, but I'm a little bit rusty on my Russian.
Спасибо.
Да, очень хорошо.
I like a bit of Russian.
Do you?
Yeah.
Я помню чудное мгновение передо мной явилось, как мимолетное видение. I'm just reading a Russian love poem to Jacqui.
Does it contain the word Novichok?
That is Putin's favourite ice cream, actually. Anyway, so back to our all-female. So I mentioned these are mentioned in this back. So yes, the female prime ministers, and Merkel, of course. Another nearly made it, and that's we think of Tom Moore, don't we, Captain Moore? But it's actually his daughter Hannah who has been remarkable. I think she took him in, and I think she has extended his life by 20 years, and you just see the emotion on his face when he talks about his grandchildren. But and there were a couple in the world of sport as well. Jurgen Klopp, I know you love your football. But let me get to my shortlist. Okay, my 3. Okay, Sarah Gilbert, who's Professor of Vaccinology at Oxford University. She's behind the Oxford and AstraZeneca vaccine. I've gone with 3 people who really have made a difference. It's a little bit of a cliche. I know people say, oh, make a difference. But, if you're looking for people who really made a difference this year, that incredible team at Oxford. I know there was the BioNTech team in Germany, Ugo Sahin and Özlem Töreci, 2 Turkish immigrants there, and I think we've got a Greek to thank as well for the Pfizer. Honestly, these immigrants, they come over here, they save our lives. Incredible. Anyway, so Sarah Gilbert was one. I don't know if you've mentioned already Marcus Rashford. Again, there's a case of somebody really making a difference, and absolutely he took the government to task and just was simply so eloquent and direct and really an extraordinary campaign that was. And in the middle of a year when he just forced another government U-turn. I know that's not a big thing. There've been so many government U-turns this year that
never happened in her day, did it?
There've been so many government U-turns. The Met Office has started giving them names. G is Gavin, obviously. So there's 2, Sarah Gilbert and Marcus Rashford, and the third one I'm going to go with Rosamund Kissy Deborah. Rosamund Adu Kissy Deborah, indeed. That extraordinary landmark decision by the Supreme Court to acknowledge that air pollution played a part in the death of her daughter. And that's about one person being able to make a difference. And that decision is going to have huge ramifications. She's fought for years. I think her daughter died in 2013. So it's been a long campaign fought through London as well, and Sadiq Khan, and people have, praised her for the work. We now have a low emission zone. We have low traffic neighbourhoods, but that's, it's a landmark, and they're going to push on from there. An extraordinary and a remarkable woman.
And we've lost a lot of people in 2020, people that the three of us have essentially grown up with. I think of people like Peter Alliss, who died a couple of weeks ago, who I know you knew very well.
Loved Peter Alliss. He was so politically incorrect. He took his time, wasn't he? He was the antithesis of the modern sort of hyped up testosterone fueled commentary. He would take his time, and he would say, well. Oh, mind your hat, madam. Oh, well done. When I say, I hope you don't mind, this is quite politically incorrect. Nota Begay is a Native American golfer, and his caddy, also Native American, and I think Nota Begay shanked one into the woods, and his caddy, Native American, goes off to look for it, and Peter Alliss thinks for a moment and then goes, oh yeah, the old tracking skills. Peter,
LBC would like to apologise for that politically incorrect anecdote there.
I did warn you, and I told you it was context, but we're talking about, I don't think...
And Sean Connery, of course, one of the greatest actors that this country, I say this country as in the United Kingdom as well as Scotland, has produced.
You can't see that ever. Sean Connery, and it was I met him actually a couple of occasions, did a BAFTA thing, and then happened to be once a friend invited us to the Bahamas, and we were next door, so I invited him around for a barbecue, and he arrived, and we were standing around for a long time, and he turned to me and said, why aren't we shitting? And I thought, you've obviously heard about my barbecues.
This is why this programme has been put out after the watershed.
Don't worry, I checked.
Now,
why aren't we shutting down?
Rory, looking forward to 2021, what kind of year do you think it will be for our Prime Minister?
It's going to be an excellent year. I don't think I'm not where I thought I would be this time last year. I thought by now I'd be on Mustique, but I just say last year I was a triumph. I mean, on whatever issue you take, whether it be testing or care homes or PPE or quarantine or school meals, we were not asleep at the wheel. We were all over the place. And I think we now have a great deal. And I knew the moment that I met Ursula von der Leyen. She has a von der Leyen condition, by the way. When I saw, I looked into the whites of her exquisite EU subsidised plates, and I knew that we were either going to get a great deal or it was going to be baby number 7.
Well,
it may be 8. It may be 8. If you've been in contact with me in the last 10 years and have a child, get a test.
On that uplifting note, Rory Bremner, thank you very, very much indeed. That's Rory Bremner there. Hopefully you'll be able to see him live doing his routine somewhere in 2021. Can you do any impressions?
No.
Oh,
you didn't tee me up for that.
No, it's just a spontaneous question. Obviously not. Well, the only one that I can do is the former leader of the Conservative Party, William Hague.
One of the former leaders.
And on that note, I think we will go to a break because we are going to be talking to Anne Widdecombe. We're going to be talking to Keir Starmer and in a moment to the man who introduced Jacqui Smith and me, David Miliband.
This is LBC.
And welcome back to our Christmas evening. Look back at the people of 2020. It's Iain Dale and Jacqui Smith here with you until 10. Let's continue with looking at some of the personalities that we've identified. We've looked at one or two foreign leaders. We talked about George Floyd. But of course, Joe Biden has emerged as president. He is going to be president, despite I don't think Donald Trump has given up on his aim to stay in office. But it was a most extraordinary year in American politics, wasn't it?
It was. It was amazing. Once again, in the context of COVID, and I think probably an enormous international failure to deal with COVID in the US, if you look at the numbers of people who've died. But nevertheless, they managed to go ahead with the presidential election. There were moments when we wondered if that was going to be possible, but they did. Massive democratic exercise, sort of tainted really by Trump's absolute refusal to concede and to recognise that this was an election which, as the Supreme Court have now found, was actually carried out on a legitimate and fair basis. And he still hasn't conceded. And I'm of the view that we're going to get to the inauguration in January and he's going to refuse to come, except he's going to sort of charge in halfway through and try and rip the thing apart, shouting, "It should have been me, it should have been me."
Well, maybe. But you look at Joe Biden, not exactly the most inspirational person. I always thought he was entirely the wrong candidate, but he did. Well, I was going to say squeak through. He actually won by quite a substantial majority.
Because what he needed to do was to win back those Rust Belt states that Trump had slightly unexpectedly won in 2016. And of course, with Joe Biden, you also get Kamala Harris. And the fact that we now have a woman in that role, that we have a woman of colour who is pretty well in a good position potentially in 4 years' time if Joe Biden at a very old age by then doesn't want to serve a second term. That's going to be that is a major change already, and it's going to have big implications.
I think, has the potential to become the person of 2021 because she is a character.
Yeah.
She reminds me of Madam Secretary, Elizabeth, what's her name? Elizabeth
McCord.
That's the one,
yeah.
McCord. I watched all 6 series of that.
I know you're
can
forever
highly
trying to get me
recommend
to watch it.
If you want to binge it over Christmas and New Year, watch 6 series of Madam Secretary. She's a kind of president that you would have been.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Well, a kind person. It's Christmas. That's what it's all about, isn't it? Should we be kind to our next guest?
Let's, because he's sort of like a Madam Secretary.
I'm not sure that he'd necessarily go along with that. David Miliband, Chief Executive of the International Rescue Committee, former Foreign Secretary. Welcome, or should I call you Madam?
Well, thank you very much. I've had many introductions in my time, but I've honestly never been introduced as Madam Secretary before, so I'll take that with love you too, Jacqui.
But David, when it comes to introductions, you have played, I think you realise, a very, very important part in the life of myself and Iain Dale, because you were Cupid. You introduced Iain Dale and me. Can you remember when that happened?
I have got a lot to answer for. My goodness, I didn't realise that was on the charge sheet as well. What occasion was that? Was it some? I honestly can't remember.
How can you not remember something as important as that? You
I
invited
remember
me.
sitting next to you in the cabinet meetings. That was a privilege.
That
But
was
I don't
always
think
good
I
fun.
don't think he was there. I don't think he was on the table.
Did you used to pass notes to each other of a naughty variety?
Definitely.
I can say that David Miliband was better behaved than Douglas Alexander, who I also sat next to, and we did used to slightly mess about. And I don't know if David can remember the occasion on which I turned round and the Downing Street cat had done a poo under the table.
You see, this is what you get on the For the Many podcast. If you've never listened to it, that is a typical example of a Jacqui Smith anecdote.
David,
Anyway, how did I introduce the two of you? Just
you
tell me that.
introduced us when you, as Foreign Secretary, invited me over to the Foreign Office to do a talk to your officials, and you were being followed around by Iain Dale because he was writing about you for GQ magazine, and you introduced me to him at that point, and the rest is history.
And look what I'm responsible for. I've led you to fame and fortune.
Right, now, let's stop this. Let's get down to the serious business. Now, David, you've got 3 people that you would like to nominate as your people of 2020, I believe.
Well, you told me I had to do this when I got an email last night, so I follow your command. I mean, I didn't realise it was people of 2020. What they said was people who've influenced you in 2020. So
That's fine.
No, that's good.
Is that all right? So
Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah.
For reasons that Jacqui will very much appreciate, my wife Louise has to be number 1. I mean,
Yes.
it would be I'd get into trouble if I wouldn't be telling the truth. I want to say this though, because I mean, there's been a crazy year, obviously, for all sorts of reasons. But the way Louise has pivoted everything to keep our family going while keeping her music going, kids who are learning remotely. I mean, honestly, I always thought she was an amazing person, but it really, really taught me so much and has just been not just an incredible rock, but has just really, lent into this crazy year. So that's number 1. The second is, I don't know if you've heard of this guy. I'd love people to get a chance to look into him a bit. There's a man called Brian Stevenson, who's a completely inspirational American. He runs something called the Equal Justice Initiative, which is based in Montgomery, Alabama. He wrote a book called Just Mercy, which which Michael D. Johnson played him in the film. You may have seen the film, and he's a warrior for equality. And this has been an incredible year for debates about racial justice, etc. And I really think he's been my teacher. I mean, I first of all met him 3 or 4 years ago, so I think he's been. I would not nominate him. And then look, just one of the things that one's looking at when one's worried about where governments are going, you think, can people outside government change things? And do you remember when one of the things I'll never forget of this year, Marcus Rashford's done many things, but do you remember when he started saying, right, okay, the government's not providing the meals, I'm challenging businesses, organizations to provide the meals, and suddenly on your phone you got pins coming up of all the places in the country that were starting to provide the meals for the kids, and suddenly the whole of Britain was sort of filled up with those red dots that were showing what he was doing. So I think he definitely qualifies.
That's the second person in a row who has chosen Marcus
Really?
Rashford, David. Yeah.
Who was the other person? Who was my predecessor in this?
Rory Bremner.
Oh, okay.
Well, I think one of the interesting things here, and I suspect we're going to hear a lot more about this over the rest of the show, is the people that launch individual campaigns, some of whom are very famous, like Marcus Rashford, others who are not. Two of my people of the year are Iain and Richard Stanton, who lost their baby at Shrewsbury and Telford Hospital Trust back in 2009, I think it was. And they have spent the last 11 years campaigning for justice for people who've lost babies in similar circumstances. And they weren't famous. Because of what happened to them, they launched this campaign. I interviewed Alicia Cairns, a Conservative MP, whose constituency I can't remember, about a week ago. She launched this campaign to make sure that women can have partners at their births, which, I mean, many people think, oh, why is that so important? Well, it is important for many people. Yeah. And she was only elected a year ago, ordinary backbench MP. She's made a difference, and that's all anybody can do, isn't it?
Why is it now possible, David, do you think, for people outside government to have that influence in the way in which you suggest? Is it something about social media campaigns? Has it always been like that?
Look, but civil rights campaigns for justice have often been outside government. But what's changed, I think, is that the resources to connect people have never been greater. Now, of course, the resources to divide people have never been more powerful. But the resources to connect people, I think, have never been greater. And the rest of this decade, maybe the rest of the century, is a contest whether the resources for division win out or the resources for unity win out. I mean, I always say to people, look, the world's more connected than ever before, but people sometimes feel more divided than ever before. And it's a contest. Are strangers going to become enemies, or are strangers going to become potential allies? That's what I think is going on. And the debate about social media, or what I sometimes call anti-social media, is at the absolute heart of this.
And one of the things, of course, that I've been doing this year with my Jo Cox Foundation hat on is we've been trying to find the ways in which the COVID pandemic experience has connected people as opposed to separated people, and celebrate that. And let's hope that's something that we can get out of what's been a grim year.
Well, we've learned all sorts of different ways of connecting with each other over this pandemic. I mean, the fact that in this programme, which you will be able to see on the LBC website in Vision, we've got all of our guests via Zoom or FaceTime video or whatever with us in the studio.
Looking gorgeous.
Looking terribly gorgeous. If we were doing this a year or two ago, it would have all just been audio, but visualisation has become the thing, whether it's a business meeting or whether on a radio station. David, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. That's David Miliband, Chief Executive of the International Rescue Committee, getting a few brownie points from his wife there for that contribution.
She is lovely.
We will be speaking to the Leader of the Opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, in just a moment. And, of course, Anne Widdecombe will be joining us. They will be both giving us their nominations for Person of the Year 2020. Let's get the latest news headlines on LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. LBC. Iain Dale with Jacqui Smith.
It's Iain and Jacqui here with you this Christmas Day evening, looking back on the people of 2020. when I thought who would we like to invite on tonight, I thought let's invite somebody who I think is going to be one of the faces of 2021.
Indeed.
The man who wants to be our next Prime Minister. And
the man who will be our next Prime Minister.
And I'm not talking about Sir Ed Davey either. We are talking about Sir Keir Starmer, who joins us now. Keir, very good evening to you. Welcome. We really appreciate you joining us this evening.
Good evening, Iain, and happy Christmas to you and Jacqui and everybody else.
Well, thank you very much. It's been quite a year for you, hasn't it? Because this time last year, we'd just gone through the general election. Nobody quite knew what was going to happen. And then 3-4 months later, you find yourself leader of the Labour Party.
Yeah, I mean, what a year it's been for all of us, and a bit of a roller coaster for me. Yeah, this time last year, we were still, on the floor, frankly, after that terrible general election result. And early in the new year, we then kicked off a leadership contest in the Labour Party, and it seems impossible to think of now, but back then in early January, my job was to run around the country and see as many people in one room as it was possible to get in one day. And the more hugging and selfies and the closer you could be to people, the more people's hands you could shake, the better. And roll forward to sort of the end of the leadership campaign by the 4th of April, the day of the outcome. And we're in lockdown. And that moment that I'd sort of held in my heart, where you turn from your own membership to face the nation and speak to the nation, was done in my own living room with just a camera and a microphone for company. So what a strange period. And then onwards and upwards through the year. In opposition.
Was there ever any doubt in your mind after that election result that you would stand? I'd love to know what goes through a politician's mind, because I mean we all have elements of self-doubt. We all have a bit of imposter syndrome. Or were you absolutely dead certain right from the start?
No, I took a few days after the election result to make my mind up, because it is a big thing. It's a huge responsibility, and there's no doubting after the general election result that there was an absolute mountain to climb. But once I'd made my mind up, I was then very determined. We're going to run a very, very positive and strong leadership campaign, and absolutely hit the ground running if we won in April, to try to rebuild the Labour Party, rebuild trust in the Labour Party. Because in a sense, 4 years to the next election feels like a long time, but it's actually a very short time if you've lost an election as badly as we did last December.
What's been the toughest thing you've had to do as leader of the Labour Party, Keir?
I think it's been trying to build teams, build relationships, restore trust in the Labour Party, but to do it in COVID restrictions, when you can't have people around a table, you can't talk to people in groups in the way you usually would, and trying to work virtually has been really, really difficult. The other thing's been difficult, and people will tell me I've got this right or wrong, and I completely get that, is trying to get the balance right in a pandemic between supporting the government and challenging the government. And that's every day we try to get that balance right. So, in a sense, in the middle of a pandemic, what people want is for everybody to pull together, particularly in periods like lockdown, when, I think most people say, look, we've somehow as a nation got to get through this.
Right.
So there's that pull towards constructive working, but then the challenge that just has to be put in when we see the government making mistakes. And that we've tried to get that balance right. And, I'm sure many people will say, well, sometimes you did, sometimes you didn't. But we that's what we're trying to do.
Right. Let's have your 3 nominations for your People of the Year. I imagine the first one is Boris Johnson.
The Prime Minister just keeps on giving.
Well, it's Christmas.
No, listen. My first one is a double ticket, which is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, because the significance of what they've achieved this year in terms of winning the presidency and the vice presidency in America, which means so much, not just for America, but the sort of values of hope over fear, what this will do for global politics. And never forget, I think 4 of the last 5 American presidents have all had a double term. So to have done this in the way that they did, I think has been quite incredible. And it gives real hope, not just for the values, but for global politics. outward again in a more international way.
Isn't there just
a shot in the arm for social democratic parties across Europe?
Isn't there just a little bit of you that thinks, well, if I win the election in May 2024 and Donald Trump had won, he would be at the end of his second term. I could have had 6 months dealing with him. That would have been at least quite entertaining, wouldn't it?
It would have been.
You could have held his hand when you went to visit Washington.
That would have been interesting. That's the sort of thing. You can write little books and things about. But actually, look, I'll go for Joe and Kamala.
Okay, your second
when
nomination.
We win in 2024
Your second
Sorry?
nomination. Your second
My
nomination.
second one. It's the care staff at Garden City Court Care Home in Letchworth. Now, in the time that I've been out to care homes a lot because of all the challenges care homes have had during the pandemic. And actually, my sister works in a care home, so it's quite a personal thing as well. And we went to Letchworth. This was just an example, and it was a really wet, very chilly afternoon, and they were just administering, the staff there, the window visits for members of families who were sitting in the rain outside the care home, talking to a relative inside the care home through a window. And there was a boy there who was about 14, first time he'd seen his grandmother since the lockdown started. But then I spoke to the care home staff, an incredible bunch of people, and they taught me through what it was like. And the particular thing that stuck in my mind was they had an outbreak of COVID in their care home, and all of the staff were told by the management, understandably, look, if you don't want to work in that part of the care home, we'll make other arrangements. And all of them had families and themselves to think about. And all of them, to a person, said, no, we will go in and we'll do what we've always done. We'll go to any part of the care home and we'll work in the areas that are risky as well as the areas that are unrisky, because that's what we want to do to look after the people we care about in the care home. And just in that little moment, you just saw this incredible dedication of people, that they were being given the choice, that they didn't have to do this. The management were being decent to them, saying, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. We can manage it another way. They all said, no, we're going to go in, we're going to do it exactly as we've always done it. And it was just an incredible reminder of what goes into the warmth of those jobs. I really hate the fact that people call care workers unskilled. I'll tell you what, not many people could do that. These incredible human skills, and they're an example, but that really went to my heart when they told me that rainy afternoon sitting outside the care home.
You're right, real unsung heroes. And your final nomination?
The final one, if you'll permit me, is my wife Vic, because she's had an incredible year. Because her husband decided to run for leadership of the Labour Party. And that brings great challenges and obviously a change to our lives as a family. She's been incredible in that. She works for the NHS and has that real sense of NHS family. But most important, I think, this year, because during the leadership campaign, she lost her mum. And it was really, really tough. It was an accident. It was unexpected. She's incredibly close to her mum. And struggling with that, which has been a struggle, as well as supporting me, has been an incredible thing this year for her. And people often say to her, in terms of 2020, surely the biggest thing is, Keir winning leadership. And actually, in truth, it was her losing her mum. And it's human bit that sits behind all the rest of it. So she's my third person, if you'll allow me a personal one.
Of course we will. That's lovely.
Thank you.
Now,
I think we have to let Keir go, Jacqui.
Can I just say one thing to
Yep,
Keir,
go
though?
on.
Because you're always criticising me for being too complimentary to Keir, so I want to criticise him about something.
You just want to get in the House of Lords.
Jacqui.
Keir, she just wants to get in the House of Lords.
Keir, you've got a brilliant team around you, but can they sort out your backdrop? You've got to get more exciting backdrops in 2021, all right?
Yeah, everybody said when I did PMQs, because I was self-isolated, that I looked like a hostage. And,
You did.
And I have to say, when I look back at it, I did. So we've got to get that sorted.
Right.
No more hostage pictures.
Well, we're going to release you now back to the loving arms of your wife. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Keir. That's Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party. You've gone all doe-eyed, Jacqui.
Yes, I know. No, but look, David Miliband, Keir Starmer, both choosing their wives. Who says Labour men aren't sexy? No, I've never said Labour men aren't sexy,
Can
incidentally.
I plead the fifth on that?
Lovely.
I think so. Right, we are in a moment going to get the nominations of Anne Widdecombe, who's not going to be choosing her wife or husband, but she might choose, well, I don't know who she's going to choose. I'm rather looking forward to finding out. And we'll also have a little talk about who we think are the villains of 2020. It's a long list.
This is LBC.
See, Jacqui, I think Keir Starmer ought to do a lot more of those sort of interviews because you see a much more human side to him than you can ever do in these deeply political interviews that he obviously has to do every day.
You and I often talk about how there need to be sort of long, detailed political interviews, and they do, longer than lots of them are. But you also need, if you're going to win people over, to show your human side and to use, as he cleverly did, a story about the care home workers that he'd met to identify a weakness in the government. Cleverly done. He sounds human. He should definitely do more of it.
Because not every politician can exude charisma all the time, but I always think after a charismatic Prime Minister, people often want, shall we say, somebody who is less charismatic, and you could argue that he fits the bill for that.
But they need them to be human as well, and
Well, let's talk to somebody who's never been accused of being charismatically challenged. It's Anne Widdecombe, who joins us, former Conservative MP and, of course, former Strictly contestant. Anne, very good to have you on the show. What's Christmas like in the Widdecombe household?
Well, first of all, Merry Christmas.
And you.
Thank you.
It's much reduced from last year when I put 12 people around the table. I'm afraid this year it's only going to be 4, but that doesn't stop it being merry.
Exactly. Now, we want to know who your people of 2020 are.
Right. Well, I'm going to start with the Reverend Pat Allerton. Now, he's the chap who, right at the beginning of the big lockdown, when the churches all closed and just rolled over, he's the one who said, right, well, if people can't come to church, I'll take the church to them. And he went out onto the streets on a tricycle with some loudspeakers and a pannier on the front of the tricycle. And he took services out onto the streets, and people joined in from their doorways and from their windows. And of course, when he first started, people were just peeping out rather embarrassed, as the British do. But the more that he went on, then with a splendid version of Abide With Me, great rendering of it, people suddenly decided, we'll go and we'll cheer this. And when he left, he got an enormous clap in the excerpt that I saw. He was doing it everywhere. So I think Pat Allerton, because everybody's heard of the Archbishop of Canterbury, probably very few people have heard of Pat Allerton, but I think it's Pat Allerton who ought to be the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
I wish I'd seen that. I can imagine you on your tricycle doing a similar thing, going around your local village, sort of preaching to the parishioners.
Well, having just given up my bicycle, I did wonder if I should regress and go back to childhood and get a tricycle.
Right, your second nomination.
My second nomination is Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall. Now, we've all seen the royals during this COVID crisis, and of course we've had the Queen doing very dignified broadcasting, and we've had William and Kate touring the country. But Camilla just very quietly, throughout the long lockdown, was ringing up old folk and lonely folk, as she was briefed, and delighting them, and doing it very much behind the scenes. I mean, you don't see much of that, whereas you see a lot of the royals out and about. So I think she's been a great asset this year. And so I say 3 cheers for Camilla, and I want her to be one of my people of 2020.
I love the Christmas card that she and Prince Charles sent out this year. She's wearing jeans, which you wouldn't necessarily think of the Duchess of Cornwall wearing jeans, but she's also...
Actually, I think any 73-year-old wearing jeans is quite something. I bought my first ever pair of blue jeans in my early 60s and my last ever pair in my late 60s, and I don't think I'd risk it now.
Never say never, Anne. Never say never.
Well, Camilla is an avid LBC listener, I'm told, so I totally approve of that nomination. Your third nomination?
Well, my third nomination is a more serious one, because I asked myself, well, who has had a massive impact in 2020? And my nomination is going to be Nigel Farage. If you remember the beginning of 2020, that big rally in Parliament Square, this is before COVID had hit, and we had left the EU, literally had just left the EU. And now, of course, we're at the end of 2020, and the transition period is coming to an end. And none of that would have happened but for one man who is completely outside Parliament's never been part of the conventional politics of the country at all. But he's achieved that, and I think that's worth noting.
I'm sure Jacqui agrees.
I mean, I agree that he's been influential. He's outside Parliament, of course, because he's never managed to win an election. But anyway, Anne, you have, of course, and you've had a second act of your political life. Is there going to be a third act? Are you going to be coming back to some sort of elected position at some point or another?
Well, I don't think I'm doing that, Jacqui, and I know that just now you told me never say never again. I was pretty amazed to come back the second time and to do the European Parliament. I hadn't intended it. Even a month before I actually did it, I would have said to you, I don't be daft if you put that to me as a proposition. But out of sheer frustration at what was going on, I felt duty pointed that way. And as I put it at the time, duty didn't just call, duty howled. I do sincerely hope that sort of duty doesn't howl again, quite honestly.
Now, you both have something in common, of course. You both appeared on Strictly. And, of course, Jacqui had what I called her Widdecombe moment on Strictly when she was winched up into the gods. Now, Anne, I know that you watched her performance. Would you like to give us your rating?
Oh, dear. Well, I mean, the first thing to say to Jacqui is no matter how low the judge's rating is, doesn't matter, because we were at the bottom of the judge's ratings for 10 whole weeks. But we were never once in the bottom two because the public just kept us going. So never listen to the judges, Jacqui. So don't listen to me when I say 3. Don't listen.
You did brilliantly, Anne, I have to say. But I didn't get enough public votes. But I think, if I'm right, I got your vote, didn't I, Anne? Or at least Anton and I got your vote.
Yes, I every year, I don't do much. I don't watch Strictly now all the way through or anything like that. But every year I try at least a couple of times during the Strictly session to go in and vote for Anton. And so, yes, I did vote for you, Jacqui.
I think you're both a little in love with Anton.
We are.
And thank you very much for joining us. Have a brilliant 2021. Thank you very much. That's Anne Widdecombe there. Now, we have lots to get through in the final few minutes with lots more nominations for People of the Year. Let's start off with Villain of 2020. I'm going to nominate Carrie Lam, the head of the Hong Kong what's it called? Legislative Council.
Yeah.
Dominic Cummings.
Of course.
And Vladimir Putin.
Yes.
Any others come to mind?
Jeremy Corbyn? No. I'm just living up to my reputation of being a hideous new Labour stooge.
Carrie Lam, I don't know how that woman can look herself in the mirror every morning.
Well, true. And next, we've talked a little bit about international events, and obviously Hong Kong has been very significant this year, and things are looking pretty grim, to be honest. And 2021 will be a really challenging year, and it will be interesting to see what emerges.
Dominic Cummings, a bit of a bête noire for you. I think he served a purpose.
Not just me.
He served a purpose, but obviously the Barnard Castle thing, I think, will forever colour most people's view of him. I always thought it would end in tears. I'm certainly right on that. But all prime ministers need a hard man, don't they, or a hard person that they can really rely on. David Cameron had them, Theresa May had them, Gordon Brown certainly did.
They do, but they need to be people who aren't going to undermine their central argument, which of course Dominic Cummings did with, I think we've agreed about this on the podcast, really weakening the lockdown because of the lack of public support that there was after he'd so clearly broken it. But never mind, he has the support of the Prime Minister because he's been given a pay rise even since he left Downing Street.
No, it can't be since he's left. It was while he was still there,
He's had a £40,000 pay rise this year. And of course, he's still, I think, employed up till the end of January. So whether or not that has implications for his redundancy, I don't know.
Nice work if you can get it.
Indeed.
Now, let's look at the world of sport and television. Marcus Rashford, we've already talked about. Lewis Hamilton has got to be up there for what he's achieved. Son Heung-min, who I think, if I was West Ham manager and I wanted to buy one player in the Premier League, he would be it. You'd obviously want to buy Jack Grealish.
Well, I don't have to buy Jack Grealish because we have Jack Grealish, and what's more, he's signed a contract to stay, and he's going to be the star of the Euros next summer, which of course is something for us all to look forward to in 2021.
That could of course be Jude Bellingham because he's making a bit of a name for himself as well at the moment. And finally, campaigners of 2020, Nathan Law the young Hong Kong chap who's had to move to this country because of his activities there. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who David Miliband mentioned? No, it was Rory Bremner. And as I said, Rhiannon and Richard Stanton. I think we should look at those. So who is your person of 2020?
Can I also mention, and I'm going to make her my person, Stacey Abrahams, the Georgian political operator. She was the person who organised to get people registered for the vote in Georgia and arguably, therefore, played a key role in getting Joe Biden elected. Electoral organisation can seem really, really boring, but it can change the world.
Well, I'm going to name Kate Garraway as my person of the year because her husband, Derek Draper, has been in hospital ever since COVID started. How she's coped with that. She's back on Smooth. She's back on GMB. I think she's been an absolute star this year. So that's my nomination. Right, join us on the For the Many podcast. We do it twice a week for your delight and entertainment. You can join me on New Year's Day, January the 1st. I'll be broadcasting on LBC from 10 a.m. until 1 p.m.